Hey everybody, today's video is about fixing some playback problems in Dorico if you're using Note Performer. Note Performer is an incredibly well thought out and very versatile virtual instrument for notation software that loads in far superior sounds to anything else that frankly I've found, and it integrates so seamlessly with Dorico, Finale, and with Sibelius. So if you're a former Finale user like me, when you bring in your Music XML into Dorico and try and use Note Performer, sometimes some really strange stuff takes place, and it's really nice to be able to try and fix those playback errors and understand what is going on with Note Performer, because it definitely works different than the built-in instruments that come with Dorico. So if you are new to Note Performer, or if you're interested in trying it out, this video is for you. So first and foremost, I'd like to share with you a little bit about Note Performer. Now, this is not a sponsored video, and I'm not an artist particularly for Note Performer, but as a composer, this software changed my life. The playback is so much more natural than the playback from the built-in instruments from Finale, from Sibelius, or from Dorico. And when I hear a chord and a group of instruments, it is so much more representative of what it would sound like in the real world compared to using some of those other software instruments. Now, I'm not sure it would be perfect for, say, submitting a MIDI recording to somebody to listen to, but in terms of just giving me a much better idea of what my music actually sounds like, it is so much better. So let's take a quick listen just to see what it sounds like. So this is an arrangement I did of the James Bond theme for my jazz ensemble, so I'm just going to play a few bars of it so you can get an idea of what it sounds like. Now, compared to most software packages, I find that to be so much more realistic than listening to the Halion instruments that we find in Dorico, or the Garriton instruments that were from Finale, or the Sibelius sound packages. Now again, I'm not trying to tell you that I could just submit that as a recording and it would be better than a studio orchestra, but in terms of, as a composer, hearing the sound playback and understanding what my chords and what my harmony will sound like and what the balance of all the instruments, it is much, much better. Okay, so now back into Dorico. The issue with the Note Performer is it functions a little bit differently than the other virtual instruments you might find in Dorico, which is where I think these problems come up. And understanding a little bit about how the play menu works in Dorico and how it associates with Note Performer, I think will help you with a lot of your different instruments and also give you a pretty good idea of how Dorico actually does these things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into the play menu in Dorico. So up here, next to Setup, Write, and Engrave. Now, for some of you, if you're used to using a DAW, this might look somewhat familiar to you. This has the piano roll view that most DAWs do, and it gives us a good indication of what the MIDI looks like. And if you're not used to looking at this view, you can imagine if you took a piano and you were to twist it on its side so the high notes are toward the ceiling and so the low notes are down, and that's what these little blocks represent. The vertical height of the block represents the pitch level, aka high and low, and then the length of the block is the duration. So if you looked at one of your parts in Dorico, that's kind of what you're seeing right here. You can see we have a track for each one of our separate instruments, and I have quite a few instruments in this track. And then there's also a chord track up here. And if you scroll down to where you might have chord symbols, you can see where there are all the chord symbols and what they are in the music. Now, here's a little helpful hint for those of you who may not have figured this out. If you want Dorico to play a real basic chord representation of your music without having to actually notate a piano part, you can click this little button right here, which enables chord playback. And you can see down here, Dorico added a whole nother channel to my channel strip because that's where the chords are going to play back. Now, I rarely use this feature because I find that the voicing that Dorico chooses to be pretty problematic and frankly not very good, but if I was trying to do a real quick thing and I just needed to know what the chords sort of sounded like, it is a really handy tool. And sometimes when I'm first getting started in a composition, I'll write out the chords like this, and then I'll go ahead and I'll turn on this feature so I can just kind of basically hear the harmony, and then I'll go back and turn it back off once I start to notate in all the other parts. Now, when you first load this up and you choose your default instrument, one of the things you want to do is you want to make sure that Dorico is loading your default instrument of choice. And Dorico does this in kind of an odd way. I'm not exactly sure why they named it this, but if you want to change the sound set of your document, you're going to have to go under the Play menu, and then you're going to go down to Playback Template. And this is where all the templates that you have available in Dorico are. You have the Halion instruments here, and then I have the HSO Soundix set with the Olympus, and more and more. And if you had more software instruments than I do, they would appear in this list if you'd added them and enabled them for Dorico. And down here, you'll see my note performer. And then this one on the bottom, literally silence, what that does is it literally turns off all software instruments so that your document would not play back. Okay, so I have Note Performer loaded into Dorico. And what you'll notice over here, if I click on any of the instruments, you'll see that it has been mapped to a specific instrument. And this is where you need to make sure you understand how Dorico thinks, because this is where I think people get in trouble and where Dorico settings can sometimes cause some really weird playback issues, which I'll show you in a minute. So over here in the routing section of any of the tracks, you will see that we have a drop-down menu, and you'll see that I have the Dorico beep, which is basically just, you know, your metronome kind of sound if you were doing recording playback on your MIDI keyboard. And then you'll see I have two instances of Note Performer. And this is really important because this is how Note Performer can use more than 16 instruments. A little MIDI lesson for you. MIDI was first designed really early on in computer language, and we're talking like the late 70s, early 80s. And so there were a whole bunch of limitations on MIDI. One of the fun ones you might not realize is MIDI does not actually allow you to play more than one note at the same time. It actually has to go note, 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 note. And so when you play a chord in MIDI, what it's actually doing is in milliseconds, it's just playing multiple notes, one right after another. It's kind of a funny little holdover from this older technology. But the other thing that MIDI has, it can only take in what they call 16 tracks or 16 voices simultaneously per bank. Now, you can add multiple banks to your MIDI instrument, but you can only have 16 instruments at a time. So you can see in my score, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, which is way bigger than 16, which is why you see the two different instances of Note Performer in this menu. The first one, 02, is the first 16 instruments, and the remainder of my instruments are in that Note Performer 03. Now, there's another really interesting thing about the Dorico playback and the use of Note Performer. Now, if I was using the Halion sound set, when I hit playback, you would see, like in a normal DAW, you would get signal on each one of your tracks down here in these channels. But when I hit play in Dorico, you're going to notice that you're only going to see playback happening in a couple of different tracks. You can see here at alto sax 1 and piano are the only two ones that appear to be playing, yet you can hear the playback of all of those instruments simultaneously. And so this is one of the things we have to understand about how Note Performer works in Dorico. So what happens in Dorico is when you assign all of these playback sounds is that it breaks it up into these different sections, and then it puts them in a separate menu that are all funneled through one of the tracks in Dorico. Now, I'm not quite sure why it doesn't utilize all of Dorico's playback strength, which is one of the strengths of the software, but since it doesn't, we just need to understand what's going on. So back here under our routing menu, you can see that if I click on any instrument, it'll tell me what port, aka which of the 1 through 16 it's going to use, and then which instrument or channel it's being routed through. And then next to that, you're going to see this E, which is Edit Instrument, and this is the menu that we're looking for. So if I click on this E, it's going to bring up Note Performer's mixer window. And from here, like a traditional mixer window, I can solo instruments, I can mute them, I can change their balance in the stereo field, so I can make them farther left, farther right, and then I can change the amount of reverb being put through, and I can change the overall volume. Now, one of the things I did, you can see over here at guitar, the blue one, I turned that quite a bit up because the guitar just wasn't quite loud enough since it's a solo melody instrument in this arrangement, so I wanted to get it a little more sound. And so this is how I would change the individual settings for the individual instruments in my Dorico project. And you can see orchestral percussion, that's the sound set and the name it uses for some of my drum sounds, because I have multiple percussion parts in this particular document. So now, if I was to go down and say, click on one of the instruments that's assigned to the other Dorico sound set, for example, bass guitar, you'll see that up here in routing, no longer is it routing to 02, it's routing to 03. And if I hit the E now, it's going to bring up the other mixer window. And this is all the rest of my instruments. And I have all the same controls, but I can't do it all in the same window. Unfortunately, you will have to open them separately. This is also where I have found some routing problems happen and where a little gremlin in importing the music XML happens. Because sometimes what'll happen is an instrument that should be in that second instance of the Note Performer mixer gets routed to the first one. And so now I have two instruments that are occupying the same channel and the same port, which basically means you're going to get your drum playback coming through your alto sax channel. So let's take a look of how you can edit these things and hopefully fix them if you're having this problem when you do a Music XML import. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my Music XML I used to bring in the James Bond that I arranged years ago in Finale and convert it into a Dorico project. And so when I open the Music XML, it's going to load in a bunch of odd settings. Now, there's another little secret tip here to learn. When you open a second document in Dorico only allows one document at a time to load itself into the audio engine, meaning you can only play back one document at a time. Now, you might think of this as a limitation, but it's actually a godsend, because one of the problems that Finale had especially was if you tried to open up one document, then open a second one and copy and paste information, if you were to hit playback, it could cause all sorts of problems and potentially crash your entire machine, where you might actually lose some productivity, which happened to me a lot in Finale. And so this is actually a really good thing. And there's a cool button up here. So you can see there's a little power button up here, and that is the Activate Project. If I uncheck that, Dorico is going to unload the playback engine from this project temporarily, and that way you'll see that the play and pause menu are now grayed out, and you can't play back. But what it also means is when I open the next project, the two of them are not going to fight through MIDI playback and through instruments and plugins and other things which can prevent your system from crashing. So again, it's a really good thing, but you want to be aware of it because you might get frustrated if you open 2 projects and you can't quite figure out why one of them won't play, because it's probably because it's not activated, and you'll need to hit that blue button to activate it. Automatically in Dorico, when you hit the activate button, it will deactivate any other open project. So let's open up that Music XML. So you'll see that because I already had a project open, it is going to activate the new project or not, depending on my choice. And because I'm trying to demonstrate the playback, I'm going to go ahead and activate it. So the new project will be active and the old one will be deactivated. All right, so it did a good job of importing like it always does. Again, that's one of the superpowers of Dorico, in my opinion, is the ability to ingest this Music XML, and like I said, it does a great job, but there is a problem. The playback is all messed up. Let me just hit play without doing anything else. Now, so far so good. You might think, oh, there doesn't seem to be any problems. But wait till we get to the next section when the bongo comes in, and then all of a sudden you'll hear what I'm talking about. You hear that annoying beeping kind of sound? The one that sort of sounds like the bongo players being played by an alto sax? Well, that's exactly what's happening because we have a routing error in our playback menu in Dorico. So let's go ahead and load that up and let me show you what's going on. Okay, so if we click on the flute channel, which is port 1, channel 1 of Note Performer 02, aka the first instance of the Note Performer mixer, you'll see that everything looks pretty good. And as I go down, you'll see that with each subsequent instrument, it's going to increase the channel up to 16, and then it's going to switch. So you'll see clarinet is on channel 2, and so on and so forth, all the way down here to trombone 4, which is channel 16. Now, clicking through, you might think, well, everything looks like it's okay, right? Because euphonium is in the second mixer instance, aka Note Performer 03, and the system starts over, and it goes all the way down, and then you get down to the bongos, and again, everything's good. The drum set looks okay, and so does this percussion part. However, here's where the problem lies. You see the little expander here, which allows us to see each individual instrument that is part of the drum set part. If I expand this in Dorico, you can see I now can see each individual part. And if I start clicking around, you're going to notice that these instruments are not all properly assigned. Look there. Kick drum 01 is assigned to port 1, channel 1 of Note Performer 02, which is exactly what the flute was programmed to. That's where the problem came. I'm not sure why, but somewhere in Dorico's ingestion process, it misses some of these percussion parts when it brings it in from Finale. So to correct this, what you have to do is you have to reassign any of these rogue instruments to their proper port and channel. Now you'll notice that all of the other parts of the drum set are Note Performer 3, channel 9. So what we need to do is we need to click on the kick drum, and we need to assign it to Note Performer 03, and then we need to assign it to channel 9. Now it's going to push that instrument's signal into the proper channel. So now, if I go back in and I enable playback and I hit go, then you'll notice everything is playing back in the channel it should. So I'm now no longer getting a kick drum being played by the flute part. Now there is one little danger here that sometimes happens to me when I go in and I mess with Note Performer, and that is if you were to accidentally, say, solo or mute a channel in this mixer window in Note Performer, you can't tell what you did out here in the play menu, and you'll notice all my playback has been muted except for the flute part that's about to begin. So you'll need to go ahead and go back into that mixer window, hitting the E, and disable that setting so that you can hear all of the instruments and all the sounds you want to hear again. Now, however, do note, if you click on an instrument that wasn't part of that sound set, and then you change the little routing menu over here, it'll actually reassign the instrument. So if you need to adjust any settings of the first mixer instance, aka that 02, you do need to click on one of those instruments before hitting that E, or else you won't be able to see it properly. You can't actually change it over here. And there's no way that I know of to like see both menus and go back and forth. You really do have to, unfortunately, click on an instrument that's in that bank, click on the E to bring up the mixer, and then you can pick a different instrument if you want to go back and change it. So hopefully this was helpful, and hopefully for those of you like me who really enjoy using Note Performer, this will give you a little more confidence when you bring in that Music XML and you can avoid this horrible playback. I remember when I first started with Dorico, I got so frustrated I had to bring in the document. I had to copy and paste it all to a brand new document because I couldn't get rid of those phantom playback problems. Now, as a little bonus, I will admit there also are some times that instruments will get assigned to the wrong sound, no matter what they're called in the side. And so sometimes for things like percussion, that is frankly kind of complicated, sometimes it's just easier to go ahead, create a new fresh drum set sound bank from the setup menu and copy over your data so you don't bring over any of these strange gremlins. It is a little bit of a pain in the butt, I realize, but sometimes it's better to do that than to spend hours and hours and hours trying to hunt down all these little MIDI problems and just start over fresh. So thanks again for watching. I hope you're enjoying these Dorico tips. If you have anything you're hoping that I'd cover or any topics that you really need help with, make sure you leave them in the comments. Send me a message. I'm always happy to help. These Dorico videos are a lot of fun. I'm a really tech nerd, and so it's great. Make sure you like and subscribe and check out the other videos on my channel. And thanks so much for watching.